Let's welcome him to the church. Thank you so much. Praise the Lord.
Thank you. A lot of familiar faces. I want to say what a pleasure it was to host the farm tour yesterday. We didn't have a lot of time, so we crammed like 83 years of growth into a 45-minute tour. But you're welcome back anytime. And just so you know, you were only about a half an hour from the Canadian border, the Thousand Islands region. It's a beautiful area. When Bill asked if we'd share our testimony concerning the farm accident, you know, you have this little element of hesitation because it's not easy to relive something so traumatic. So I'll preface this by saying we will get a little emotional reliving this, so just bear with us. But after you ask yourself, boy, do I really want to go through this again, you realize it's not about us. We are the living proof of the grace of God, the power of prayer, and it's our prayer that what we have to say is for the glory of God. And if anyone here is in a season of self-doubt or fear, we all go through it. We hope that our testimony today will inspire you to turn back to the Lord a little stronger, grow in your faith. And with that, we'll get going. Certainly in all of our lives, there's been a time or an event that you'll remember forever. Some of you, I'm sure, know where you were or what you were doing when 9/11 occurred. Certainly when the man first landed on the moon. For Clark, my father-in-law, he still tells stories about the one-room classroom, one-room schoolhouse. It's like the only time he never had to go to the principal's office because there was none. But for me, my family, many of our employees and friends, July 30th, 2013 is one of those days. A day very similar to this, a beautiful summer sunny day, probably a little too hot, but I was in the barn, and those that were on the tour, you'll have a better understanding, but I was in the barn standing in the feed alley where we delivered the feed. We got cows on both sides of the barn. There's a big open alleyway between the groups of cows. We delivered the feed. That particular day, we were moving bred heifers, and the group that they had to be unloaded was at the furthest end of his original freestyle barn built in '69. So like all of us, we don't think far enough ahead. You kind of box yourself in with your expansion. So the easiest way to deliver those heifers was to back down this feed alley all the way to the end and unload these heifers. Well, I was working down there in the feed alley, multitasking, working off 2 lists of cows, a list of cows that we were going to have to vaccinate and prepare for dry off, and then a list of cows that I wanted to get preg checked for the following week's dry off. Men, we are not good at multitasking. Leave that to the women, because I was so focused on these lists and had my back to the cattle trailer coming down. I was in their blind spot, and in a instant, all of a sudden I got something bumped me, and I took a couple steps, and I turned and looked, and all I see is this cattle trailer. And in an instant, you're underneath this cattle trailer, which they did go and measure later, and a 2x8 on edge would not fit under the bumper. So how I ever slid under there, I don't know, except I'm just a little duffer. And so all of a sudden I realized, you know, your first thought, and this all happens in like 2 seconds, your first thought is, man, where am I? What just happened? Okay, I know where I am. I got to tough this out. Well, the tires didn't get me. It was the rear axle, the bumper. So as I'm getting crushed and heard a little bit of bone crushing, all of a sudden I had this flash of Lisa and our kids. But it was when they were little. And things got, just bear with me. Things got really dark. So I thought that was it. But I was okay with that. And I immediately prayed to God the Father, and I said, Father, if you're ready to take me home, I'm okay with that. However, I think I'm still young enough to help expand your kingdom, but let your will be done. And that's how my mind worked in about 2 to 3 seconds. And I immediately felt this sense of peace. Things got a little lighter. The pressure was off. And as I looked forward, I saw the pickup truck coming. So now I got to decide how I'm going to get between the tire of the pickup and the rear pumpkin. But I knew I was going to be all right because, well, we all know why. The problem was my legs couldn't move. I just couldn't get positioned so I wouldn't get crushed again. I just happened to look up, and I saw the jack of the trailer above me, and I just grabbed the jack. It dragged me a little bit, and eventually they got to where they had to be to unload those bred heifers. Of course, they didn't know any of this was going on. I heard guys getting out of the pickup truck, and they started walking to the back of the trailer, and all of a sudden I said to them, somebody needs to call 911, and they jumped. Of course, they didn't know I was there, so they panicked a little bit. The interesting part about these kind of accidents, everybody has their story. They really do. So they called 911. One of our herds people happened to be a first responder for a fire department. He came out. I prayed. I asked him to pray with me. I did the praying, but he kind of took charge of the situation. They unhooked the cattle trailer from the pickup truck. The ambulance backed down the barn. And they started to cut my pants off. I had one little 3-inch gash on my right shin, and that's about it. This whole time I've never lost consciousness, but I had a lot of shallow breathing. And we all watch too many movies, and I just kept telling myself, stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. I didn't open my eyes after that, but I talked to everyone. The breathing's shallow, but they're cutting my pants off, and my first thought is, my wife's going to kill me. These are a brand new pair of work pants. And she is not, and they slit these pants right up to check me, and they cut my shirt off, and they were suspicious of what they call flail chest. We'll talk about that in a little while later. At this point, it hasn't hurt yet, and I haven't lost consciousness. So eventually the rescue squad gets there. They load me on a backboard, and now the pain's starting to set in, and it was excruciating. And the young man in charge of the rescue squad went to high school with our oldest son. His name was James. And I said to James, you got to give me something for the pain. He said, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Porter, we're not authorized. I said, James, you didn't hear me. I need something for the pain. He said, well, because all this time I'm thinking I'm going to the hospital. Well, I was, but not in an ambulance. He says, well, Mr. Porter, when we get you to the helicopter, they'll give you something for the pain. So when he said the helicopter, I knew things weren't good. So I said, James, how come the helicopter didn't come to the farm? Well, anytime there's a farm accident, which are generally bad, they call the helicopter immediately to be on standby. And the rule is when they get to the ambulance starts heading towards the hospital. and there's stop points where the helicopter gets ahead of the hospital. So they had to take me to Adams Center, which is like 3 or 4 miles. These ambulances are the roughest riding vehicles you'll ever be in. You could feel every crack in the road. I'm trying to pay attention, left turn, right turn. We don't have much further to go because I'm in a lot of pain. So we get to the town barn in Adams Center, and the helicopter's ready. That's where Lisa caught up with me to give me a big old shot of morphine, and they start asking us some questions. And they asked me, now I haven't opened my eyes, but they asked me how much I weighed. So I told them, and I heard them ask Lisa how much she weighed, and she couldn't come up with an answer. But the whole time I'm thinking, dude, you don't ask a woman how much she weighs. What? I didn't really know what it was all about. And the last thing I recall at that point is just a lot of vibration and noise, and the helicopter took off. They flew me to Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse, which is our it's the level 1 trauma hospital. We spent 7 weeks there. But so I wake up in the ER, and nobody's really telling me how bad it is, but Lisa was there, and our pastor, and my cousin, a lot of people, my daughter. So I didn't end up. They found out that I had a crushed pelvis. Thank God it was to the inside and not the outside. If you're going to crush your pelvis, it's much better to have it crushed to the inside. 16 broken ribs, 22 breaks. That resulted in flail chest, which is very dangerous. Dislocated right hip, broken left collarbone, broken left scapula, punctured left lung, fractured left hip, and broke some tips off my vertebrae. Well, at this point in the emergency room, I was more concerned about missing my grandson's first birthday and making sure she was going to be okay. So they first surgery that night. They had to repair the pelvis. The hip they put in traction. Quite a long surgery, got done with it. I'm in recovery. Lisa notices I still have a lot of shallow breathing. I'm cold. I'm not awake, so I'm just repeating what she told me. And so I already have one chest tube in the left lung that was punctured. And she went and talked to the recovery nurse that she just didn't think I was right. And the recovery nurse was like, no, that's normal for post-op. So eventually they're going to be taking me to my room, and on her way out, she stopped and talked to another nurse. Turns out the other nurse did her job. She came and checked me out, and next thing you know, there's a bunch of people rushing in. Well, the right lung had collapsed because of all the air, all the punctures in the left lung, and they're pumping all the air in the left lung, filled the chest cavity, collapsed the right lung. So now I got 2 chest tubes. The next 3 days, I was in and out of consciousness, but I had conversation with everyone. I'm repeating commands on dairy comp for some of you dairy farmers, because my cousin wasn't familiar. I wouldn't even open my eyes, but I'd tell him how to type it in. On day 4, they decided to go to try to repair my hip. They sent Lisa home from the hospital because she's exhausted. And it was going to be a really long surgery. They were going to intubate me. I wouldn't wake up until 10 or 11 the next day. So they first had to repair the socket itself with a lot of plates and screws, and then they put the hip back together. Well, the next morning I woke up a little earlier than I was supposed to, and of course you start gagging because you got this tube down your throat. I didn't know where I was. I just pulled it out, and the bells and whistles went off. I got scolded for that, but everything was okay. A little while later, they came in and asked me if I wanted radiation on the hip. I said, well, how come you didn't just give me a new hip? They said, well, the integrity of the bone, you wouldn't have been able to handle a new hip. I said, well, what's radiation supposed to do? They said, well, evidence shows it might help prevent arthritis. I said, okay, I don't care. So, and Lisa wasn't there yet. So they took me down to the basement of the hospital. That's where all the nuclear energy and radiation occurs. These 3 little nurses, we get down there and they have to transfer me from the gurney to the stainless steel flat machine that then you go in and they were taking measurement. And when those girls moved me from this gurney to the platform, the pain was so incredible. And laying on that stainless steel, it's the first time I'd been on a hard surface, and this is day 4. It hurt so bad that as I'm going into this machine, I'm thinking, I don't think I really need radiation because this is bad. And I was going to have to go do it again at the radiation machine. So they came back out and they put me back on the gurney, and as they're wheeling me to the other room, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm just going to tell them, forget it. I can't handle it. The short, very dark-skinned young man, quite stocky, came in. And he helped these 3 girls move me from the gurney onto the next platform. And all of a sudden, there was no pain. None. The machine, I slid in the machine, I got my radiation, came back out. And I'm thinking, this is going to hurt. They're going to move me back onto that gurney. No pain. 0. So as they're wheeling me out the doorway, I kind of just stuck my hands out to catch the doorway. And the young man was standing to my left. I couldn't move my left arm anyways. So I reached across and I asked him what his name was and thanked him. And he said, Simeon. So on the way back up to my room, and ICU's towards the top of the hospital, so it took a while. I'm thinking, Simeon. That's not a real common name today. What's going on? So by the time we got to the room, Lisa was there, and I'm kind of excited. I said, Lisa, there's a guy down there named Simeon. You got to confirm that this really happened. Because I'll be the first one to admit, I was on a lot of drugs. Okay? I'm not going to deny that. But it's as real today as the day it happened. I said, can you find out if there's really a Simeon that works down in the basement at Upstate Medical? And she talked to some of the nurses in ICU, and they're like, well, I don't know. And I was so adamant, I kept harassing her all day. I said, have you found out yet? So they finally really kind of took us seriously, and they checked into it, and they said there was no Simeon that worked in the basement. So I'll leave it up to you what you want to believe, but I know what I believe. So day 8, and this is modern medicine, day 8 with all my injuries, physical therapy shows up, and they're going to get me out of bed. They said, Mr. Porter, what do you think about getting out of bed and sitting in that chair? And I said, I don't think so. Huh? Yeah. So they set me up. Now, the left hip is only fractured. So in their mind, I'm supposed to be able to stand and pivot and sit. Now, the only way they're going to hang on to me is with a bear hug, but it shouldn't be an issue. The left hip's just got a fracture. Well, the problem was when I went to stand to pivot, the left leg gave out. They had to bear hug me, of course, with 16 broken ribs. It's like, here we go again. She's all upset because what's going on with the left leg? Left leg's supposed to be fine. They tried it one more time, it didn't work. So they sent the orthopedic surgeon up that put me back together, and he's did his little hammer on the knee, and there's no reaction. He says, oh, I know what that is. He says it's that they put a stabilizing bar in the front and rear of the pelvis, and it's kind of a blind placement. So the front bar ended up pinching the femoral nerve on the left leg. The nerve controls the muscle. So now I don't have a left leg to work with. I certainly don't have a right leg to work with. I got a wife that's really upset. I'm just trying to get through day to day. So, and they hadn't done anything with the collarbone yet, and that was excruciating. So they decided they were going to operate and pin the collarbone to the scapula, and that did make a big difference. A couple days later, once rehab won't take you as long as you're still hooked up to fluids and all this. So they disconnected all that, sent me down to the rehab floor, which is like ground level maybe, and they start rehab. Now, they love their farmers in these hospitals because the farmers don't complain and they do what they're asked to do. So, of course, I really don't know how many injuries I have. So I'm telling myself, come hell or high water, I'm going to walk out of this place. Now, it took 3 therapists to get me out of bed the first day, take me into the gymnasium. It's the most depressing place you'll ever walk into. A lot of stroke victims, amputees. It's hard to stay upbeat. The therapists were fantastic, and they start asking me if I have anybody that can build a ramp at home. And of course, I'm thinking, I don't need a ramp. I'm going to walk out of this place. They put a little washcloth on the floor. They told me to put my right foot on it and move the washcloth, just back and forth. And I couldn't do it. Now, for somebody that played a lot of sports in high school, farm kid, all of a sudden reality starts to set in and you're like, I'm in a little bit of trouble here. I couldn't even slide that washcloth. But I found strength in Philippians 4:12 through 13. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. So you had therapy 2 or 3 times a day. They really, at the time, loved pushing the pain pills because they don't want the pain, you don't want the pain to get ahead of you. August 23rd that year became an even more special day. It was on our anniversary, our 26th anniversary. Now, I don't know if this was a setup or not, but the therapist decided that was the day they were going to let me try to stand up. And it was quite an ordeal. Sue was there. I remember you being in there, and some friends that brought macaroni and cheese that night. But it took 3 therapists, and the bench they elevated. So at the end of the day, I probably only really rose on my own about 6 or 8 inches. But it was a big day because I stood for the first time on my left leg, but the therapist had to be in the walker holding the knee back because I don't have a femoral nerve working, but it was a big step in the right direction. You practice a lot about slide boarding from the wheelchair to the commode, The whole experience is traumatic as it was. In the hospital was really quite a wonderful event. And the outpour of love and support was so overwhelming. And my wife was incredible. Every card she put up on the wall, the nurses had never seen anything like it. and it was taking up 2.5 walls in the room. Security guards, because there is a floor with the prisoners at upstate, they have security guards. So every visitor that comes in has to have a picture taken, and you have to wear a badge. They're asking, who is this Greg Porter? Is he some kind of rock star? Because we were getting visitors all the time. But all of a sudden, you're reading these cards and letters, and some were from employees that worked for us 20 years prior, 25 years prior. And they're mentioning stuff that I had said to them that really resonated, and that's how they're trying to live their life today. A couple letters were from farmers that were at the Northeast Dairy Producers Association conference that I spoke at 29 years ago. And they talked about the 5 daily priorities of the dairy herd. They went home and tried to, they made that part of their operation. So I emphasized to my kids when I got out of the hospital the power of the tongue. So Proverbs 12:18, the word of the reckless pierces like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And in Ephesians 4:29, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building up according to their needs, that it may be benefit to those who listen. We came home from the hospital September 9th. But now, the fear, the challenges, the burden became really very real. There's no more nurses to help you out. It falls on my wife's shoulders. Our family doctor made a house call, and the drugs that I was on took up the entire length of the counter, and he started going through them on the first day, and he said, we're going to get him off that, we're going to get him off that, get him off that. 1 hour every day, they backed me off. We went to church the first Sunday, overwhelming experience. Every praise song spoke to you. I fell in love, to this day, my favorite song is I Can Only Imagine. Communion holds a different meaning today, even though it was special always. And we didn't really know this at the time, but Lisa kept a journal every day in the hospital. And she prayed to Lord Jesus. You know what it's like to have a broken body. My husband. To me, with communion, I couldn't get out of my head the level of pain that Christ had to endure. And by no stroke of the imagination am I trying to say I endured that same level of pain. And we all think we know physical pain. I thought I did. I broke both arms playing Pop Warner football. I broke my wrist wrestling. I thought I knew physical pain. Most of us don't. There's a level of pain that is undescribable. And as we're taking communion and I'm thinking about what Christ went through, physical therapy became our social life. 2 to 3 times a week. I started out in what they call a therapy pool, 95 degrees temperature water. It had rails that you could hang on to, a treadmill underwater, TV screen underwater, so you could watch your gait, how you were doing. I started to make progress. Prior to Thanksgiving, they decided they had to take that front stabilizing bar out of the pelvis because if it stayed in there much longer, it was really going to jeopardize the femoral nerve on that left leg. So they took the bar out, they took the hardware out of my shoulder. I started using a walker, so I'm feeling pretty cocky that we're really progressing. And after one of the pool therapy sessions, we had to go to Syracuse, meet with my therapy doctor, who was one of my favorite doctors, and I'm telling her how I'm walking with a walker now, and she's like, "Oh, that's great, let me see." Now, she wasn't supposed to do this, but she let me start wheeling down that hallway, and all of a sudden, in an instant, my legs just gave out, and I'm on my knees. Now, my arms aren't straight out, but they're hanging on to the side of the walker, and I'm on my knees, and the first image I had was the cross. That was my reminder that I'm not going to do it on my own. So we continued to make progress, more and more with the walker, started using a cane. In February that year, our daughter, Casey, that many of you met yesterday, she was running for state dairy princess down here to Syracuse. She was our county princess. Our hotel room was quite a ways from all the conference rooms, and I'd made 3 trips during the day using the walker, but you're exhausted. Well, the main pageant was that night, and Casey insisted that I walk her in. The dads usually escorted the daughters. Well, when I got down there that night, and I'd brought a cane, but I went down with the walker, and I told Casey, I said, "Honey, I don't think I'm ready to use the cane. I'm kind of tired. You might have to ask your brother to walk you in." And she says, "No, Dad, it's you or nobody." So that's a little bit of pressure. But I walked her in. I made it. She was crowned New York State Dairy Princess that year. That following morning, I went to get out of bed, and oh my gosh, my right hip hurt terribly. And I thought, well, I probably just overdid it a little bit. Did a lot of walking the day before. We made it home, kept going to therapy. The pain's getting worse and worse. The leg's getting shorter. All of a sudden, I've lost like 1.5 inches length on my leg. And some of these arrogant therapists, they're going to get me better. You just got a bad injury, and we're going to tough it out. After 7 weeks of more pain than I'd had since I'd gotten out of the hospital, and I'm going backwards, it's the first time through all of it you could feel yourself starting to get depressed. But we eventually found out with the x-rays that the head of the femur, or the ball, had died off and shattered. And that goes back to when they put me back together, there's one small blood vessel that feeds the head of your femur. And the longer you're dislocated, the greater the chance that blood supply gets cut off, but they have no way of knowing. So when they put me back together, they said, well, it might last 1 year, or it might last 10 years. We don't know. Well, it lasted about 7 months. The problem is, because the socket was all rebuilt, they didn't know if they were going to be able to give me a hip replacement and make it work. They were going to have to take out a lot of screws. I needed to have a lot more bone growth, or they're going to have to give me a bone graft. The particular surgeon that put me back together had left this hospital. Now I have a new orthopedic trauma surgeon, and he didn't lack any confidence, but he was making a lot of faces, and he said, you need to know there's probably only 2 people that would even attempt this. Makes you feel good, right? And the fear is because I have some permanent sciatic nerve damage along with some other nerve problems. They didn't know if they'd get all my length back because when they stretched the leg, they didn't want to overstretch the sciatic nerve because then you'd have drop foot and that doesn't get better. Well, because we all know God works in mysterious ways, the first date they gave me for the surgery was going to be my birthday. And I said, that's fine. But she wasn't going to be in town, so she said, no way, I'm going to be there. The next date they gave me was going to be our oldest son's wedding. That's out. So I ended up going even another month, almost to the day of the accident. It was like July 18th when they finally gave me the hip replacement. But because of that delay, once he got in there, I had enough regrowth of the bone that he didn't have to do any bone grafts. He only ended up having to take out 2 or 3 screws in order for everything to go back together. So it was really quite a success. But now rehab starts all over again. And I was listening to talk radio one day, and they were interviewing Nick Foles. And for anybody that likes football, Nick Foles played for the Philadelphia Eagles and ended up winning a Super Bowl and was the MVP of the Super Bowl just a few years back. But prior to that, he was just kind of a journeyman. But he's a strong Christian, and he talked about embracing adversities. And it was James 1:2-4 that really hit home. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, wherever you, better put my glasses on. I can't read my own writing. Whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. That gave me a lot of strength and hope as I'm going through this therapy all over again. Today, we're reminded of the accident every day, the minute I roll out of bed in the morning. I'm blessed to be able to do almost everything I had done prior to the accident. I'm blessed that I did not get addicted to any painkillers that we've learned more and more about today. And we're doing our best to be more bold in our faith. It's not easy. It's easy to talk individually to somebody about it, but when your wife's sitting there crying, it's hard to hold it together when you're up here. But I thank everybody for their prayers. There were a lot of prayers that went out worldwide, mainly because of a lot of the missionaries at our church, Clark and Sue's church, a lot of churches. So it was wonderful. Lisa's going to share, because really, I said everybody has their own story. I was the one that just had to get better. She's the one that had the burden of taking care of me. So she's got some wonderful stories to share quickly.
I'm not sure how you follow that. And there will be more tears. Lots of them over there. So I'd like to share with you about 3 things that I learned about as a result of Greg's accident. And they were strength, weakness, and love. Here I go. So on July 30th, on the way to the hospital, first person called my dad to tell him what had happened and to ask him to pray. He and my mom are my number one prayer warriors. So he answered me with Proverbs 3 and 4. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths smooth and straight. Except when he got to, in all your ways, his voice trailed off. He knew what had happened. Being a dairy farmer himself, he knew how much space there was between the barn floor and the bottom of that trailer. He couldn't finish the verse. And I heard my own voice, almost in third person, saying, acknowledge him, and he will make your paths smooth and straight. So I want to share about strength, not falling apart at that moment and verbally responding to my dad was an out-of-body experience for me that would last almost a year. That wasn't me. I'm not a strong person. I never have been. I never will be. But God in me gave me the strength to speak that morning and to go on by faith through what I was called to do next. The power of the Holy Spirit is within all of us as believers. The same God who raised Jesus from the dead and gives us the gift of salvation through Christ resides in our souls and is closer than our next breath. God in us is powerful, and he will be with us when we call upon him. Psalm 18:1 and 2 says, I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. And then there was weakness. 2 Corinthians 12:9 reads, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weakness, so that the power of Christ can work through me. Greg's accident had made him weak physically. We learned in the hospital that unused muscles lose their power by 7% each day that they aren't used. And for 60 days, Greg didn't walk at all. I don't think he lost, doing the math, 420% of his strength, but some days I felt like I had. He couldn't stand, he couldn't sit up, he couldn't roll over, he couldn't go get a drink of water. And I won't get too personal, but he couldn't even go to a bathroom, let alone do any of those processes on his own, which is difficult for any adult person to be so dependent upon someone else. He was broken literally. He was so fragile that the day we finally left the hospital, they told us if he falls, just call 911. Don't try to get him up. Don't do anything. Just call 911. No pressure there. I think we drove home from the hospital that day going about 35 down Route 81, up Route 81. But even in our weakness, we can still do kingdom work. 1 Corinthians 13:13 says, there are in the end 3 things that last: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. I always say, give the man a microphone and he becomes a different person. Greg is a very quiet person, unless you're talking to him about farming or hunting. But there was one thing he could do without anyone's help, and that was speak to people. And he started ministering to everyone around him. Every doctor, nurse, therapist, custodian, secretary, aide, food service person, visitor that Greg came in contact with, he treated with respect and love. And we encountered a lot of people in that hospital who did not feel loved or respected. And when he did that, sometimes he even used words. If the opportunity presented itself, Greg shared his faith. He talked about the miracles that had allowed him to survive, and those were just the ones that we knew about. Someday when we get there, we will find out what each one was. I could say that you wouldn't believe all the miracles that occurred to preserve Greg's life, but if we listed them all, you couldn't help but believe. Him being here today is a miracle. Not once did he complain or blame. He just kept moving forward, meeting each new challenge with faith, hope, and love. In all Greg's ways, he acknowledged God. And our path, though difficult, became smoother and straighter as time went on, because we didn't have to do it alone. We had a wonderful human support system along with the support of our Savior. We're very blessed to have 3 communities who lifted us up in prayer and helped us along the way. First was our family, our flesh and blood, came to visit us often and sit with us and help care for Greg when I had to be away from the hospital, which was more than I wanted. I came home and did payroll. And as Greg said, our daughter was state dairy princess. She had a lot of responsibilities. I had to go with her. So our family came, even when they had to drive for hours. Or with cancer. Greg's mom came to visit him every week. When it was payroll day, she was suffering. But she made a point to be there. My parents lived 3 hours away. They would make the drive. My brother, our sons, came to visit. Mommy and Dad, my dad, came from Watertown weekly at least to see Greg and encourage him and pray with him. They came and they just kept coming back. We were rarely alone. And as Greg said, it was to the point where the security guards started asking who he was and why so many people came to see him. Also by family, I mean the family of God, our brothers and sisters in Christ who prayed without ceasing and encouraged us with visits and cards and calls and texts and rides for our daughter and gas cards and cookies hanging on the back door when we got home. We heard from Christians literally from across the street and across the globe with words of prayer and love. Over the past 8 years, it seems like everywhere I go, I've met people who have said that I've never seen before, I prayed for your husband. How's he doing? Isn't God wonderful? And we also belong to an agricultural family. Farmers and agribusiness people wrote us long letters. Our cousin Steve, who was running the farm at home in our absence, couldn't keep up with the texts and phone calls from local farmers and agribusiness people offering their help to roll up their sleeves and work alongside us if necessary. And as Greg said, we heard from dairy industry people and employees from 30 years ago or 5 years ago or last week because something he had said impacted them. Your words do matter. It is important what you say and what you share. And lastly, it was our rural community family. We live in a small farm town. Greg's family's lived there for generations. The response was amazing, and the kindness of our neighbors was incredible. Only God could turn a horrible situation into a blessing. He turned darkness into light. He gave us beauty from ashes, and tragedy became an opportunity. And bear with me as I try to explain this. We're called to rejoice in our suffering, which is not very much fun at all. And it wasn't, but it was beneficial. 1 Peter 4 says that when we suffer, we partner with Christ in his suffering. What a privilege to be called to partner with our Savior. On the most difficult of days, I did not have the strength to argue or give my opinion or do much at all but the next thing, and to submit and to obey God. That was exactly where God had called me and blessed me with the opportunity to live and learn that very difficult truth. When you are at the end of your rope, when you are called to be there, you're not alone. And so much can be gained and learned. I'm a little bit ashamed to say I think I've forgotten some of that and have needed to be reminded. Sorry, Greg. Sorry, Mom and Dad. Sorry, Dad. I'm not always the easiest person to get along with. We all have our moments. But God calls us to be obedient and to love him and listen to him and submit to him. But the wisdom from above, first of all pure. It is also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. So, Fellowship of Christian Farmers, I encourage you to plant seeds of peace.
I don't know what to say next. Thank you for sharing how the Lord has been working in your life, and all the healthcare professionals and therapists, and fantastic. Well, Bill, we have a report from Canada, a video, and can we go to Canada now? Okay.
president of the board of the Fellowship of Christian Farmers in Canada, and I'm here with Ed Plett, our executive director, and we were asked to give you some news. Hi everyone, we hope you're having a good conference. My name is Jocelyn Aubu. I'm the president of the board of the Fellowship of Christian Farmers in Canada, and I'm here with Ed Plett, our executive director. And we were asked to give you some news, and we're happy about this. Thank you for inviting us. Things in Canada have been pretty slow. Everything has been canceled. We're a bit jealous about you in the States. You seem to be quite active. And I'll invite Ed to give some news.
Hello out there. We're having quite a hot summer out here in BC, and very, very dry. So we'd appreciate it if you could remember us in your prayers, because I know that in Europe they're having very, very heavy rains, and here we're not having any rain. So just have to ask God to even it out a little bit. Anyway, we've been working at trying to fill some field positions here in Canada. This has proven to be a difficult task in the midst of the COVID epidemic and the restrictions applied here in Canada. No one is able to set up the usual events at this time. As you can appreciate, we are all well aware of the difficulty in trying to get a field person off the street to take this position. Without having had experience of actually setting up and being involved in running an event themselves is nearly impossible and might be rather ill-advised. The candidate should have run at least one training session as a chapter leader before becoming a field person and trying to train others. We have approached some well-seasoned chapter leaders to take such a position, but no new field person has been appointed to date. We're still praying for these outstanding positions to be filled. In terms of events, we did actually have some events in January and March. Our Fraser Valley chapter entered into 2 virtual trade shows. The Pacific Agricultural Show was held in January, on January 18th, just a one-day show, and a virtual booth was entered into the BC Boat and Sportsman Show for the whole month of March. Unfortunately, there was very little feedback on the efficacy of these 2 ventures. We have an active new chapter in Kelowna, British Columbia, which began outdoor events along a popular walkway on the shore of Lake Okanagan in Kelowna, beginning on the Canada Day weekend in July of 2020, and each weekend through that summer until early September. This has proven to be an exciting new opportunity with a similar schedule for this summer, beginning the Victoria Day weekend, which is May 22 to 24, and resuming in late June on the same basis as last summer. The International Plowing Match, which runs almost every September in the oldest and longest running, that's 122 years since 1899, as well as the largest fairs operating in Canada, second only to the Calgary Stampede, which was canceled in 2020. So the International Plowing Match, by the way, is canceled for 2021 again, although this Calgary Stampede is operating this year on a shortened venue. The reason that the IPM was canceled was that the organizers were uncertain about possible restrictions due to COVID. And as some of you probably are experiencing in the US as well, some of these events are scheduled tentatively and then they have to be canceled because of some changes in the COVID situation. In terms of getting ready, though, for opening of events, we've moved a large milling machine from Lloydminster, Alberta, which is sort of halfway up the province of Alberta, to Swift Current, Saskatchewan, and that move is completed. The actual hookup to the electrical supply is still to be completed. It should be ready to go by early fall of this year. And we look forward to getting a regular supply of fine sticks for the use of the Western chapters. During the lull in the usual events with the public because of COVID-related restrictions, a small group of us have been doing some editing work on brochures and pamphlets given out at the events to complement the short explanation of the gospel message using the 5 colored beads. One purpose of this exercise is to ensure that the French and English versions of these pamphlets are consistent. The draft of the revised literature is soon to be presented to the board for comment and approval. We're looking forward to continued improvement in the opportunities to share the gospel in the months ahead, and looking forward to what God has in store for this ministry. Let us never measure God's unlimited power by our limited expectations. And a little bit on a good news side, here in British Columbia, things have opened up almost entirely again. And so we're just looking forward to having some of these shows going ahead. And we still are waiting for several of those to be announced, definitely. So again, blessings to you and your show, and we look forward to hearing from all the good things happening in the U.S. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ed. So you seem to be more open than BC. Here where I am in Quebec, all of our events have been canceled again for a second year. So we have to be patient, and we try to share the gospel in different other ways. So once again, we wish you a good conference together. And don't let the COVID bug get at you. So be safe, and we'll keep in touch. Bye-bye.
We have one more report from our new friend, Arthur Chiza. Arthur, would you come forward and share a bit what's going on in your life? And
good evening. I didn't prepare a report, but I will speak from my heart, because what I'm talking about is the subject I know so well. So it will be my lifetime conversation of what brought me here and what I've gone through as a person. I'm called Arthur Chiza, born in Uganda, 47 years old. I want to appreciate your speech. I know what you went through. I was also in an accident recently, but I survived. But especially your wife, how she spoke from her heart, I think she could be a great pastor. It was touching. In those who have visited Africa, I've met 2 of them here. There is something they call Ubuntu. Ubuntu. Ubuntu means humanity. What a human being should do. It's a very, very famous African word, Ubuntu. We are all human beings. We all believe in one God. But what does Ubuntu mean? Ubuntu means having given chance to be born in this world. What should we do as human beings? No matter where you come from, no matter what you do, what should we do? I was born in a family of 9. My mother was forced marriage. We call it marriage by capture at the age of 14. She went, she started giving babies. Could not read or write. My father didn't go to school, alcoholic, bad man. Because of the kind of life they lived, especially my father, they died at a very young age. And the cause of death was HIV. Left me when I was 14 years, but with the grace of God, I had my old grandmother. I love grandmothers. They play a big role in this society. I am who I am because of my grandmother. She raised me with my siblings. I went to school, primary school. I would wake up 5 o'clock, milk cows with hands. Run to the next local center, sell milk, because that's where we got school fees. Then run to school, 18 kilometers away. Sometimes you reach there, you find other kids are in break, sometimes at lunchtime, so you've missed the whole day. But we kept on going, and we didn't know much. But the fact that I had chance to go to school, and my grandmother wanted me to go to school, that was good enough for me. In 1996, I finished what you call high school here. 1994, sorry. And you remember what happened in Rwanda in 1994. There was a genocide. One tribe against the other, whereby close to 1 million people were killed. You are a Hutu married to a Tutsi, which are two main tribes in Rwanda. You are required to kill your own wife, or the other way around. People died. It's all over internet. So when I finished high school, I went there to volunteer. They wanted kids to go and clear the bodies, wash buildings, and I was one of them. Moved from Uganda to Rwanda. We were there for 2 years. With grace of God, again, I met a priest there who loved me and who offered me an opportunity to come to the United States and study. That's how I ended up at the University of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. I just can't figure it out. With my own background, I know you can't figure it out either. But sometimes we take things for granted. When I look how I was born, and when even to sit on a plane that you are going to America, you just can't imagine it then. But life is life. You get used to situations. Now when you go to plane 3 times, 4 times, you drive here in America, you start speaking English, you wear shoes, life becomes normal. You eat, you gain weight, and their food was not there, but now you eat, you don't finish food. Somehow you think things are okay. You forgot where you came from. So when I got that scholarship, I studied, I graduated, I got an opportunity to go and work in Iraq and Afghanistan during the war, 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8. I went and worked there under President Bush. But my mind was in Africa. My mind was my grandmother. My mind was the village where I grew up in. I didn't want to be comfortable in this country. I didn't want to forget my roots. And I remembered those 4 cows on a 2-acre land that paid my school fees, which gave me an opportunity to move on in life. I got married to a beautiful wife whom you will see one day. My son is here. Jefferson, you stand up. It's our firstborn, 16 years. Now, to him, my story is like a movie to him because he didn't see nothing. He said, "Daddy, you went all through this?" Yes, I did. So I tried to walk with him. I tried to make him listen what I went through so that as we age, we leave a story behind whereby our story or stories can teach the generations to come. I'm worried about the young generation, and I think we need to talk about it. We come to such a conference here, we find seniors. I love senior citizens, don't get me wrong, but they're in the evening of their lifetime. So if we don't get people to follow in their footsteps, we'll lose all this. We'll lose your knowledge. We'll lose such a great organization. So my call to you, to your children, to your grandchildren, to this, I'm glad I came here. I just can't thank God that I came here. And I tell you how I found out this organization. So let's recruit more young people to go on and on and on. We keep on hearing such stories. Farmers share similar stories, no matter where you are. There are people that work so hard in this world, but with very less recognition. Back home, 80% of our population, they do agriculture. 87%, you can imagine. So the whole horizon of lifestyle there and economics really depends on that percentage, almost the whole country. But they are the people who never get recognition. They are the poorest people in the society. Those who have visited farmers here, and I know there are some who have gone there. My friend, I met him here, he was telling me stories in Zimbabwe. Stories in Zimbabwe, stories in South Africa, stories in Kenya, in Malawi. They are similar stories. The lifestyle, the way of life is the same. So what am I trying to say here? So when I finished Iraq, I saved some money. I said I must buy land. Remember, in my family, I'm the one who really kind of got education, and we are still in the other 2 acres of land. Some of my brothers have produced kids. So we are living like in slums, many kids. So I got money and I bought a big land. And I said, let me go and do farming. Started with corn, didn't work out. Went for watermelons, didn't work out. I said, let me go back to cows. In my culture, we do dairy. Now, when I say diary, it's not our diary. We just graze cows and milk them using our hands. So I went, bought some cows. That in 2016, it was a dry season. The fire came, burnt the whole of my land. Sold whatever cows that survived. Now my land was empty again. The following year, I said, let me try corn again. We work with rainy season and dry season. We don't have irrigation. You just go by season. So when it is rainy season, then you plant. Dry season, you harvest. No irrigation, no nothing. So you have to move how the seasons go. So I tried corn the second time. Floods. I lost the whole thing. Then I hated farming. I said, I'm not going back to farming. I have a college education. Let me go and look for a job. I can't do this. But the other heart, say, Arthur, you are who you are. Because of those 2 acres you grew up, because of those 4 cows that paid your school fees, don't run away from your own culture. Somewhere in my home back in Kampala, I'm praying, my faith is low, I'm not doing so well, I'm tired. I have a family to take care of. And I'm the only person working in the family, on a farm, educating 3 children. My wife, a housewife. So the whole burden of a home is on my shoulder. My farm didn't work. I have a farm. Say, let me sell it. Then do what? So I started praying, seriously praying. I would kneel in my home and pray. And I went online and searched who can understand my problems. I put farmers in America. You read their webpage, politics, policies. Then I say, let me search. There could be some group called Christian farmers somewhere in this world. I put in word into my friend Google. You know, Google does everything for you. Then this organization popped up. I read, I watched these videos. That the speeches you've been giving here is what I've been watching online. And I started communicating to Dennis, and I didn't know what was this. So when I came here in March. When I get a mobile phone, the first number I called here was his number in Chicago. He said, look, I'm a Christian. I hear you are Christian farmers. I want to be part of you. He told me about COVID, but I kept checking on the website. And that's how I ended up here. God brought me here. I just want to tell you, my brothers and sisters, my grandmoms, my moms, I can see here who could be my parents. No matter where you go, we are all human beings. We face similar challenges. Many years ago, in my family, no one could speak English. I speak English today. I can communicate. My son can, my daughters can. The world has become too close because of technology. So let's use this technology and reach to those people and help out, if you can. And I know we can. And it doesn't have to be financial help. It could be sharing a prayer. It could be going there and teach how to plant corn. It could be there how to do milking so that we don't use hands anymore. It could be those people are hungry about learning. They want to learn. They want to be part of you. You want to be the same world. I really thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. And I want to be part of you. And I'll be part of you. Let's share. Let's learn from each other. I thank you and may God bless you. Thank you very much.
Praise the Lord. Okay, you need to raise your right hand. Do you have love for the Lord and you have an affinity to the soil? You're in. Well, I was told a long time ago, the older you get, the faster the time goes. This has really been a great, quick day, you know? Just one great thing after another. We have a break here, and we're going to have another meal. Seems like we eat a lot when we're at conferences. Do you ever notice that? It's like every 2 hours we're eating, but it's great. So we have a break, then we come back 5:30 to 6:30. We have another program tonight with a concert. At 6:30, Bill Brown, anything else we need to announce? We're good?
We're going to close the sanctuary off during that time to cool it down.
Okay. All right, let's pray. Lord Jesus, thank you for touching our hearts. From the testimony, from the perspective of what is going on in the world that we've heard this afternoon, from our workshops, fantastic workshops. Lord, give us a bit of a break and a rest here, and just pray for our program tonight, our speakers and the singers, our time of getting better acquainted with new friends and old ones. Again, we just commit our time and energy in our program tonight and tomorrow to you. Thank you for the opportunity to serve you through the ministry of Fellowship of Christian Farmers, and we pray